Deputies in Greenville County need your help finding a man wanted on gun and drug charges.
Fox Carolina photojournalist Zion Dendy stopped by the Greenville County Sheriff's Office for more on the case.
Tonight's most wanted is 24-year-old Jamel Rashad Goldsmith, who is wanted on multiple charges, including unlawful carrying a firearm and drug-related charges. Now, this case stems from back in August of this year, when Mr. Goldsmith had a report against him that he was shining a flashlight through a stranger's window. When deputies arrived on scene, they located him. He was placed on trespass notice and allowed to leave. Now, unbeknownst to the deputies at the time, Mr. Goldsmith had ditched a backpack he was wearing just prior to their arrival. And when this was brought to the deputies' attention, they found a loaded firearm and multiple narcotics inside of that bag. Henceforth, warrants were obtained and issued against Mr. Goldsmith, and we have not been able to get him in custody. So we're hoping that the community can come forth with information about his whereabouts, and we can put him behind bars. Mr. Goldsmith is described as 5'9", 150 pounds, with longer black hair that is often worn in twist or dreadlocks. And as always, if anyone has information regarding his whereabouts, we ask they call us at 864-271-5210 or Crime Stoppers at Greenville at 23 Crime.
Yep, there's one more look at Mr. Goldsmith. Call 1-888-CRIME-SC.